An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6. Chapter 44. Parting is Such Sweet Sorrow. Silently walking the halls, Arya decided she had no real fondness for Riverrun. Granted, this was the ancestral home of her mother's house, but Arya shared little connection to anywhere but the north. None of her full siblings did. Sansa had her fair Tully beauty, but such was all. To a man, they were all of the north. For Arya, her special training developed a preference for narrow spaces and hidden blind spots common in the northern fortresses, but lacking in the airy Riverrun. A flat effect grafted itself to her face, emotion gone for most of the time since the night of the coronation. The coronation feast had affected many. Jon brooded. Daenerys was icy to those not family. Sansa and Robb buried themselves in their official tasks. Her mother, Catelyn, was despondent over the loss of her uncle. Most of all, a sense of pallor and gloom had settled over the Targaryen Stark camp. Our string of uninterrupted victories wasn't bound to last, Arya mused. But in a sense they all had grown cocky and arrogant, even the humble emperor. Combined between the two of them, only Hardhome had been a setback. Even that was a victory. Daenerys had taken over the Dothraki, captured 3 major city-states, and held them without issue against the master pressure. Jon had united the wildlings, defeated Ramsay Bolton, and won the ground at Riverrun. It seemed, against their best instincts, invincibility slowly set in. Daenerys' close brush with death hit that sense hard, and that did not extend to the fact only Arya knew. Each minute of each day found the young woman thinking and planning on how to grapple the new dimension sprouting up. A new enemy that was so familiar at the same time. It was her fight, and so only she wished to know, and Arya couldn't bear if Jon blamed her if he found out. Call her selfish, but she would go at this alone. Shaking that thought from her mind, a soft whimper caught her attention. Hand darting to needle's hilt, Jack and Hagar's training instinctively kicking in. A girl's feet glided along the stone floor without a sound. A girl stuck to the shadows, unseen by man or god. Observant ears zeroed in on the soft cries. Coming from the nursery. Her eyes widened slightly, ever so slightly. Threats to the wolf pack were the only tip that could pierce her impassive armor. Jon and Daenerys were out. Doing what, Arya had no idea. Bed rumpled, leaving little doubt as to what they were up to last night. Fighting the urge to gag, she drew needle and crept silently to the slightly open door to the nursery. A quick peek inside deflated the tension from her in a split second. Rhaegar and little Arya were alone, only a single candle flickering shadows across the walls. Her relieved smile at the lack of danger morphed into heartbreak at what she was seeing. Little Arya sat cross-legged on the floor, sobs racking her body. Her brother held her tight to his chest, stroking her back and whispering that it would be all right. Only for tears to stream silently down his cheeks as well. It hurt like a knife to see her beloved niece and nephew in such pain. It took mere seconds before Arya couldn't take it anymore. Sheathing needle, she slid into the room and rushed to them. "Little wolves!" 2 comforting arms wrapped around them as she knelt beside the twins. "Don't cry, little wolves," she asked softly. "What happened? What's wrong?" Eyes shutting tightly, Rhaegar shook his head. "Nothing, Aunt Arya." His sister merely clutched at her namesake, pressing her bloodshot eyes and soaking Arya's cloak with her tears. She had obviously been crying for a while. Frowning, Arya glanced down at her nephew. "Rhaegar, don't lie to me. Why are you crying?" She comforted the princess, letting her cry herself out. "I'm not crying." The tear streaks on his rosy cheeks belayed the truth. "A prince does not cry," he choked out defiantly, sniffling. Oh, boys and their bravado. Memories of Robb, Jon, and Theon punching each other in the stomach to see who could go the longest without crying or throwing up came to her mind. "You may be right in general, but you are with your Aunt Arya." She motioned with her free hand, not wrapped around the princess. "The pack comforts its own." Down breaking, Rhaegar's sobs flew as he lurched himself into Arya's embrace. I'm sorry! He could barely speak over the tears. Oh, little wolves. Seeing them like this made her heart clench with pain. Part of her wanted to hunt down whoever did this, as she did Amory Lodge, but another part of Arya informed her that the prince and princess weren't in such pain. Please, tell me what's wrong. We just got Papa back, little Arya said for the first time, voice faltering from the agony. Why does he leave us? Papa doesn't love us anymore. He promised to stay. Even when trying to deploy the Targaryen fire, when it came to his beloved father, Rhaegar couldn't hate him. Hence the tears. Arya sighed. Dragons were passionate people. With someone like Jon, only the wolf blood within his veins could keep his anger and temper from burning down entire battlefields to avenge threats to the wolf pack. The wolf in him kept Daenerys in check as well. She being pure dragon. Your father loves you. He and your mother both. Then why, little Arya sniffled, is he leaving us? Their emotions were normal. Arya felt it as well when Gendry left on his scouting mission. The fear at the danger he would be in, the black pit in her chest at being without him. She hated it, but welcomed it at the same time. Her love for him and love for her family grounding her against the loss of individuality that befell her, all other faceless men. Having gone through the agony of countless loss, she could process this far better. The twins couldn't. After being told stories of a great man that was their father, then meeting someone that exceeded such expectations of kindness, love, nobility and strength, now he was being ripped away. Little wolves, I know that both of your parents would stay with you forever if they could. Their love for you is endless, from here to eternity. The sobs quieted down slightly, though their small bodies continued to tremble in her embrace. He would not leave if he had a choice. Little Arya looked up, wiping a cake of snot from her flushed nose. Is it the bad men? The ones under Cersei Lannister? The wild wolf pressed a kiss to the princess's forehead. Clever girl. Yes, they are threatening the people of Meereen, where you two grew up. Rhaegar wiped his tears. A ruler must protect the people. His aunt tousled his hair. You're just like your father. Rhaegar smiled weakly at that, as if through the sadness it gave him pride. Arya hugged them both tightly. Let's get you both to bed. Soon they were both settled. A gentle kiss to Rhaegar's head left him fast asleep. Arya repeated the same to her namesake. Aunt Arya, will Papa come home to us? Oh, he will. Jon was the proverbial cat with 9 lives. If anyone could make it alive through impossible odds, it was him. He will come back to the pack. Slowly exiting the room, her fists balled with silent rage. Joffrey, Cersei, Meryn Trant, Ilyn Payne, Littlefinger, the Mountain, the Waif, Tycho Nestoris, Viserys Targaryen, Joffrey, Cersei. The 2 Tully guards immediately came to attention as Jon turned the corner, spears clanking against their mail armour. Your Majesty, they said in unison. Clad in simple black armour, the Targaryen Empire was unmistakable amongst those within the Riverrun castle. The image of the great Jaehaerys Targaryen, at the heat of the fight hacking away at their enemies as dragons roared overhead, was seared into the minds of anyone that fought in battle alongside him. No king, or even lord for many of them, ever fought in the heat with his men, nor would a queen or a lady do so either. Yet Jon Stark and Daenerys Targaryen did. Walking past with a smile sent their way, the Empress having done the same after passing them the day before, both guards knew exactly why they and their fellow subjects beloved them so much. Entering the library, light streaming from the large windows alien from anything Winterfell had, Jon's gaze quickly found the people he wanted to see at the end of several racks of books. Seated along the table was Sam, little Sam perched on his lap playing with wooden figures, a Across from him was Gilly, the Lady Shireen right alongside her. "All right, you can do it." The young girl pointed to the manuscript, tracing the letter with her finger. John saw his best friend's paramour knit her brows in concentration, thinking hard. "Remember? It looks like an animal." Gilly closed her eyes in deep thought. "Snake." They snapped open in a minute. "S! It's an S!" John chuckled. He could count on one hand the wildlings he had seen that were literate. And if John or regret were considered, as a lot they weren't easy to teach. "Very good, Gilly. You're getting the hang of it." Smile fading, Gilly and Shireen quickly stood up. "Your Majesty," the Baratheon noblewoman said in a respectful tone, eyes pointed to the ground. "We didn't see you come in." He waved them off. "'Tis all right. Go ahead and sit." The two visibly relaxed and resumed their previous positions. "So, is this how Davos learned to read and write?" For the life of him, John couldn't fathom how his hand's unintelligible scribble counted as proper words. But he kept that to himself. He wasn't the most studious, but the tutors at Winterfell made sure he learned as a nobleman should. Shireen laughed. "Oh, trust me, he was much worse. Quite hard teaching an old person anything." "Old person?" John found that quite hilarious. "She is a good teacher, Your Grace. Unlike some people." Gilly shot Sam a knowing, flat look. The portly man bristled a bit. "All I tell you is that you'll learn faster if you practice more." At that moment, little Sam playfully tugged on his father's beard, dissolving into giggles as Big Sam yelped. It took several deep breaths for John to compose himself once more. "Well, keep up the good work, and you'll be there in no time." He turned to his friend. "Sam, you sent for me?" "Yes, come with me." Sam moved towards the far end of the library, motioning for John to follow. Sending a small smile at the woman who was Sam's betrothed in every meaningful way, the Emperor moved to where the pseudo-maester waited. "All right, Sam," John said in a low voice. "What do you need?" He made time for his best and longest friend. Not his brother or sister, but he was still rather busy and wished for this to be quick. "I've been searching Riverrun's library for the pressing concern to our north." John knew exactly what he meant. "I couldn't find any information on the White Walkers themselves." "I didn't think you would. If Winterfell's library didn't have anything, then Riverrun's likely wouldn't." "That's just it, though. I found dragonglass." John's eyes widened. "What?" he whispered excitedly. The Joffrey first strategy did not end or lessen John's fear and focus upon the threat to the Long Night and the Night King. Daenerys, much as she professed her belief in him and the army of the dead, didn't seem to share his pressing concern, and it worried him. He, Sansa, Robb and Sam allowed any unused time here and there to figure out a solution. Where is it located? A sudden sinking feeling filled him. What if it was firmly in Joffrey's grasp? Sam noticed his friend's worry. Dragonstone, John! Apparently it has mountains of it in its caves, spreading underneath the cliffs. He watched as the Emperor's expression brightened, determination crossing his face. Who do we have in charge of Dragonstone? The Greyjoys. John scowled, still not close to forgiving Theon for his past betrayal. Yara had been a part of the rape and pillage of the North, but she didn't stab them in the back as Theon had. He didn't like them as allies, but had no choice. They needed the ships. Get to the Rookery, and send a message there in all haste. I want it mined and sent to White Harbour as fast as possible. Nodding just as Sam moved to go, John clasped his shoulder. Sam, not a word of this to anyone. His voice was so low, only he and Sam could register it. We need to keep this as secretive as possible. Knowing that if dragonglass was known to be so desired by them, the Lannisters would be far more likely to threaten the shipments to force the Targaryen armies to attack on grounds of them choosing. Sam understood this. Of course, my lips are sealed. With that, the portly nobleman dashed off. Sigh leaving his lips, John left the library for the airy halls of Riverrun. He needed to speak to someone who had seen the threat of the dead firsthand. Davos and Ollie were busy. Marjorie wasn't a military mind, and he had no idea where Tormund was. That left Robb. Servants bowed and soldiers came to attention, but the Emperor brushed past them. Not dismissive, but rather brooding and pensive. The Night King has been quiet ever since Hardhome. Reports had arrived from Ed at Castle Black. Every 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. but aside from an occasional errant wight every now and again, there had been no sightings. It worried him, for the threat of the destruction of all life on the planet. Lost in thought, John absent-mindedly grabbed the knob and threw open the door to his brother's room, sans knocking. "Rob, I need to speak with..." Basically, John walks in on Rob and Marjorie doing something rather inappropriate. "John!" Quickly draping a fur over his betrothed's bare back, Rob's face reddened in anger as he turned to his emperor. "What the fuck are you doing? Has fucking knocking ever crossed your mind?" Eyes rooted to the flickering lantern mounted on the wall facing away from the couple, John's earlier mortification gave way to a creeping amusement. Private with his own body, in contrast to Daenerys, who whatever modesty she had was tempered from living amongst the Dothraki, the lack of any sense of decorum that the communal brothers in black or free folk had accustomed him to such displays. The Rose of Highgarden was quite stunning. His brother was a lucky man. Just the sheer ridiculousness of it all caused the laugh to bubble inside John to spew forth. Rob was not amused. "What part of this invasion of my private quarters is comical to you?" Blush adorning her cheeks, Marjorie, wrapped in a sheet around her, scurried into the bathroom, door closing behind her. "Do you have to ruin this for me?" John tried to compose himself, only to mixed results. "I'm sorry, brother." He covered his mouth as his brother scrambled to toss on his breeches. "This just reminds me of when 11-year-old Sansa walked in on you and the Tanner's daughter in the stable." "If looks could kill, Robbers would have had the fury of Dragonfire. I thought we agreed to never mention that," he hissed. Undeterred, John once again burst into laughter at the memory. The look on his father's face when Sansa ran through the courtyard screaming that you were killing the girl. He covered his mouth to stifle further chuckles. "To be honest, I am shocked Lady Stark didn't teach you about lovemaking before that incident." Bare-chested Rob crossed his arms with a scowl covering his face. "If you weren't the Emperor, I would punch you right now." John only grinned further. The Lord of Winterfell may not have had the gumption to get physical with the sovereign that so brazenly intruded on him, but his betrothed, storming out of the bathroom covered up fully in an elegant dress, hair a bit dishevelled, was another matter. Marjorie smacked him on the shoulder. "You scoundrel, John Stark!" She smacked him again, flushed with anger. "Next time, fucking knock like a gentleman would." "All right, my apologies," he said. No one was supposed to strike the Emperor, but John let it go, since Marjorie was essentially family. Family he rather liked as well. "Now I know what I might be witnessing, I shall endeavour to knock." Huffing, but accepting his words as sincere, Marjorie strode over to Rob's side and leaned up to kiss his cheek. A smile crossed her face as her husband-to-be soon relaxed. "Now, Your Majesty, why did you come here?" John didn't mince his words. "We found a source of dragonglass." The couple's eyes widened. The significance was not lost on them. "Where?" "Ironically, Dragonstone. I've had Sam send instructions to the Greyjoys to begin mining. Though how much there is, I don't know." The scowl returned. "Greyjoys," he spat. "I don't trust them either, Rob," Marjorie told him, hand on his chest. "But they are sworn to Daenerys." "Fine. But John, what does that have to do with us?" The Emperor sighed. "I'm sending Sansa north to Winterfell with the twins. Keep them safe from the Tywin, and prepare the north for when the Night King eventually crosses the wall." He looked them both in the eye. "Daenerys believes me about the threat of the others, but I don't think anyone else apart from the Northern Lords and us, who were there at Hardhome, think it's even possible. They fight against Joffrey, but think the dead are but myths and legends." Stepping forward, he clasped Rob's arm. "Brother, I am making you the commander of the army. Sister, I am making you chief of court. Make sure the threat of the Night King is taken seriously." Sharing a glance with Marjorie, images of the massive corpses rising in one wave on the beaches filled both of their minds. He saw his determination flickering, reflected in her eyes. "We will." "Come on, Ply, hurry!" Bundle heavy on her back, Meera nevertheless moved with a speed and agility honed through years of trudging through the cypress-infested swampland. Compared to waist-deep bogs, the paved alleys of Karth were easy to move in. It hadn't surprised her when Bran, out of nowhere, told them they had to leave with all due haste. The conversation between the King of Karth and the Giscari came to mind. And with the greatest city that ever was and ever will be joining forces with the Masters and Joffrey Baratheon, their presence was completely untenable. Her brother, Hodor, and Bran waited by the water, Meera having stalked out an excellent embankment point hidden between dilapidated shacks and abandoned warehouses. All that had left for her was to get there, and they could flee to Meereen aboard a small sailboat. Behind her, Ply Quirrell felt his legs throb from the physical exertion. "Hold up!" he gasped out, breathing rapid. "Wait! Hurry!" she called back, gesturing for the rail-thin boy to pick up the pace. Turning a corner, Meera gasped as she skidded to a halt. 6 soldiers waited for her, a skeletal figure at the van. "Good evening, my dear," Pyat Pri said, his voice calm and friendly. The blue-tinted lips curled into a grin that stretched hideously over his thin face, overcame whatever amity his tone projected. His grin widened as Meera involuntarily stepped back. "The College of Warlocks cordially extends an invitation to dine with us tonight." At that, the men began to approach. Meera dropped her bundles and drew a short sword, a gift from her father. The truncated blade designed to fight in the brambles and thick flora of the swamps called home by the Cranach men. One Qarthi soldier charged at her, but she easily darted out the way and slashed through his stomach. "Ply!" she cried over as the soldier's pained scream. "Go to Bran!" Eyes wide in fear, the apprentice warlock hesitated. He had always lived a sheltered life and never experienced true bloodshed, and felt his stomach roil within her. Steel clanging against steel as Meera parried a blow. "Run!" she shouted before a fist slammed into her shoulder, knocking her off balance. She managed to glimpse Ply dashing away on quick feet before rough hands grabbed her and hefted her into a tight grip. Kicking, squirming, lashing out at her captors, Meera felt blood pour into her mouth as she managed to sink her teeth into the arm of one of the men. Another let out a cry when her foot slammed into his jaw. Suddenly the wind was knocked out of her, nothing but a gargling grunt leaving her lips as Meera keeled over from the punch to the stomach. She collapsed into a boneless heap on the dusty road. Before she could even curl up into a fetal position, the burly arms enclosed around her again, hauling her up. "That will be enough of that, young lady." The wraith-like warlock smiled. Pyat Pri's smile didn't falter one bit after the northern noblewoman hocked up a spit into his face. "Do not fret," he motioned with bony fingers to the soldiers. "You will be reunited with your beloved soon enough. A maiden doesn't deserve to be taken away from her beloved." Still wriggling, though only half-heartedly thanks to the throbbing pain in her abdomen and the tight grip holding her in place, Meera looked up to the heaven. "Bran, please, help me!" Only the wind answered her plea as their destination loomed over them. "I adore you, Daenerys." A shiver went through Dany's body as Jon punctuated his declaration of love with a tender kiss on her neck. Resting between his legs atop the smooth stone, his arms wrapped around her lithe frame, warming her in the chilled cold. "And I you, Jon." For all the crowns and kingdoms in the world, all were pittance to her when measured against this man. He was her world. A world soon to leave her. They rested atop of a large cliff, wind surprisingly weak and gentle this high in the air. Below lay the vast expanses of the Riverlands, a white carpet marred only by barren forests and the banks of the River Trident. There was no better sight for the imperial couple to spend their last moments, for quite a while, alone from the rigours of leadership and the headaches of ruling, away from the grim realization of an impending separation after having so at long last found each other again. For they could just be Jon and Dany, newlyweds in love. Curled up in front of the pair, snowmelt heated by the heavy warmth of her scales, Rhaella enjoyed being in her parents' proximity. Sisters off hunting while her older brothers slept, She lazily gazed to where her mother and father rested. She picked up the serenity between them, and it calmed her. Sometimes I think of a life without a title. Daenerys turned her head, peering up at her husband. His eyes were off in the distance. Without the blood of kings and lords, where it could just be us, our children, and our family. He wrapped his arms around her. All I'd need to concern myself with was protecting and providing for all of you. She pressed her back to his front, enjoying his warm skin. I'd be content with that, my dragon wolf. As long as he was in her life, she'd be content. Unsullied and stark guards surrounded their emperor and empress, but aside from the ever-loyal Sir Barristan and Ser Jorah, they formed a skirmish line in a semicircle. Keeping a wide berth, the wary soldiers largely felt that the 3 adult dragons, 3 juvenile dragons, and swords their sovereigns had within arm's reach, would be enough to keep them safe from immediate threats. It was a rather safe assumption to have. Suddenly, screeches and hoots filled the once tranquil air above the imperial couple. Rhaella's head picked up, gaze zeroing in on her sisters flapping above the cliffs, a large stag being carried in their jaws and talons. Rhaella let out a screech of her own. Jon and Dany watched tranquilly, while the soldiers witnessed the mystical creatures with rapt attention. The adults barely raised their heads at the antics of the youngsters. As Sensenya and Daenerys dropped the carcass close by their parents, Rhaella hissed at them, digging in. Her sisters ignored her. The lilac dragon shrieked and moved to barrel her way through the others to get to her prize. Dany furrowed her brows at this behaviour. Just like Balerion at that age, she thought. Rhaella's older brother had such a violent temper, and if Rhaegal's leaving not tempered him to loneliness, it likely would have been worse. Best to end this before it began. Rhaella, be nice to your sisters. The dragon ignored her, snout poking into the stag and gorging her fill. Scowling, Dany reached out to tap her tail. Rhaella! The stern tone and forceful tap startled the dragon, followed by anger. Rhaella whipped her neck back. A brutal, carnivorous fury filled her eyes. Teeth bared as a primal scream left her throat. Jerking back her hand, Dany's eyes filled with fear, her daughter essentially turning on her. Satisfied that she wouldn't be bothered, Rhaella turned back to her feast. Having seen the interaction, Jon bristled. A slow scraping of metal indicated that Jorah and Barristan were close to drawing their swords. So this would have to be settled soon. He squeezed Daenerys' hand reassuringly, gently extricating himself from his position. Rhaella! Jon said in his commanding tone. Rhaella, don't turn your back on me! Annoyed at her lunch being interrupted again, the lilac dragon moved bare her teeth when again, out of nowhere, a firm hand smacked her on the snout. No! Face set in a dark, angry expression, Jon smacked the dragon again. Not enough to truly hurt, but enough to catch her attention. Attacking your mother? Disgraceful! Disappointment and scolding filled his tone. Have I not taught you to be an honourable dragon? Despite being able to rip apart the man before her, Rhaella couldn't help but shrink back, eyes pointed to the ground in shame. A low whine left her, remorseful and apologetic. It isn't me you need to apologise to. With that, he pointed at Dany, staring down his daughter. Crawling slowly, Rhaella reached where Dany was sitting. The dragons were quite intelligent, bonding strongly with their riders and those that raised them. Thus she knew what her father wanted and demanded she do. The whine that left her throat again, snout gently poking her mother's arm in submission. Daenerys fought to laugh at how utterly uncharacteristic it was. She had seen these gorgeous creatures in every state of savagery and affection, but it was still quite strange to see a mighty dragon so submissive. Smiling, Dany reached out to stroke Rhaella's snout. You are forgiven, my dear. The dragon's elation at the contact was felt both by her and Jon. Rhaella pushed into Dany's lap, resting her head on the soft skin as her mother continued to pet her scales. Just don't do that again. A dragon is terrifying, but must control itself. A hoot acknowledged the lesson learned. Jon grinned, watching Barristan and Jorah softly laughing at the scene, along with most of the guards. Good job, Rhaella. She seemed to perk up at the praise. Now go eat. Enjoy yourself. Rhaella hooted at Jon and raced towards the carcass once more. watching with satisfaction, and not a little pride, the same look as if watching the twins excel at their lessons. He turned to see his wife staring at him in more than a little awe. "What? How did you do that? I could barely keep Balerion, Rhaegal and Edaron from misbehaving and losing their savage tempers when they were at that age." Sitting down next to her, Jon pulled the gorgeous woman into his lap. "Reminded me of Rob and I when we were starting to become men. Mean and rebellious. Whenever we disobeyed any authority, Father would cuff us upside the head and sternly tell us to do what we were told." He leaned in to kiss her. "Always worked, too. So why wouldn't it work on dragons?" Hands clasping the sides of his head, weaving into the curly locks that she so adored, Daenerys pulled him into a deep kiss, their mouths melding together lovingly, Jon's hands resting on her waist and sending tingles through her body. Eventually, they broke apart for air. Dany looked into his eyes. "Sometimes you amaze me, Jon Stark." "And why is that?" Jon asked, pecking the tip of her nose. Dany giggled, allowing herself to feel like the young woman she was. "You are a good man, and a great ruler." She hugged him tightly, burying her face into his neck. "You deserve your family, Jon. You deserve all of this. You may not want all of it, but that only means that you are the right one." For once, Jon was inclined to believe her. "I know." Her silver locks were scented with lavender, refreshing him every time he smelled it, granting him a reprieve from the battle cry. "The fighting. I long to know some peace before I die." She hugged him tighter. "We will, Jon. I promise." Dany pulled back to look at him intensely. "You need to promise that you will come back to me." Knowing that he had to leave, the knowledge threatening to split her heart in two, she couldn't bear to even speculate that this might be the last time that she was with Jon. To hold him, kiss him, whisper sweet nothings to him as they made love. "Promise me, Jon." "I promise." Both rising, he pulled her into him and crashed their lips together in a frantic, heated kiss. A kiss that communicated their love for each other. A kiss that promised many, many more to come. Tears, unbidden but unavoidable, trickled down Dany's cheeks as Jon broke the embrace and headed for Rhaegal. Barristan, smiling sadly at the Empress, nodded. "I'll protect him with my life." It would be him and Ollie going with him to Essos to defend their far-flung empire. Regrettable but necessary. Dany barely heard, eyes trained on Jon. About to bite his dragon, he turned and looked her way, face forlorn. She felt the same. Minutes later, seeing the green and white forms of Rhaegal and Edaron ascending ever skyward, Dany stood quietly. Not a word left her, nor a sound escaping the jaw of any man or dragon present. It felt as if the heart of Westeros had left the land. "Come back to me, my love." Only the ever-distant roar of Rhaegal answered her. From the moment Ply arrived, practically leaping through the concealed entrance to the hidden dock, with the news that Meera had been taken by the College of Warlocks, the normally placid Jojen had been pacing back and forth in a panic and anger. "You did this!" he yelled at the apprentice. Hodor flinched at the shouts, clearly agitated. "I didn't know." Ply had his hands up, tears in his eyes. "They don't tell me anything. I'm nothing to them." "You should have known." "Quiet." Bran's voice was quiet, but authoritative. Opening his mouth to respond, Jojen instead thought better of it. Sinking down to the ground, he wrapped his arms around his midsection and looked completely sullen and dejected. Resting in his chair, the young Stark leaned his chin onto his palm, deep in thought. "Ply, have the Warlocks acted any different in recent days?" Only the young apprentice to ever visited him recently, and it had been pretty easy to convince him to leave with them, rather than stay with the secretive college that shunned and abused him. Ply shook his head. "No." His eyes narrowed in thinking. "Well, they've spent more and more time inside their inner sanctum. Much more than normal. They are in shade of the evening trances more than they are of normal continence." It had happened before, but only once, several years ago. Suddenly a flash passed through Bran's eyes, one of a thin aristocratic man with a hooked nose and flowing gold robes shaking hands with the King of Karth. The scene changed, shifting rapidly. Image fading and morphing into one of Meera being tied by chains in a dark chamber, flanked by a circle of columns, several warlocks surrounding her. He blinked, everything vanishing into reality. She's in the House of the Undying. Jojen drew a knife. I'm coming with you. Bran threw up a hand, stopping him. No. You are the only one among us with sailing experience. Until we get Meera back. It wasn't much, but being marsh dwellers meant the Crannog men knew how to man a boat. You and Ply stay here and wait for us. If I don't come back by the time the sun is near the highest in the sky, leave for Marine. Waiting until his fellow Northman nodded, Bran looked at Hodor. The gentle giant wordlessly walked to him and scooped him up, chair and all. Hodor! Hodor! Somehow Bran understood exactly what he was saying. We'll get her back. Hodor! Yes, I know she does. I think I do as well. Hodor seemed mollified, grinning toothily. Closing his eyes, the Son of the North found the old man's voice ringing in his ears. Be ready, Brandon Stark. You face the most trying test of your life so far. You know. The statement was flat. Less of a question, rather than both that and the answer. You know why they have taken Meera. If Hodor saw interest in whatever Bran was saying, seemingly to no one, he did not show it, nor stop in his steady plodding towards the outskirts of the city. A sigh filled Bran's hearing. They want to lure you to get to me. Why? You shall find out soon enough, Bran Stark, though I suspect you already have the answer. Opening his eyes, gazing at the towering vestige of the House of the Undying, bathed in the low light of sunset, Bran found that he did. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that because I did. And though, admittedly, that's rather sad, isn't it, that chapter? And I like what they're doing with Bran. They're not robbing him of his personality. Poor Jon, poor Dany, and poor little dragons too. I like how Arya is still so overprotective of them. Or rather, not overprotective, just protective. You know, the little wolves, the little members of the pack, the pups. I just find it really sweet. And of course, we're getting into quite an interesting part of the story now, which I really like. I'm not going to give you spoilers because the video will come out in 3 days. I hope you guys like my system, by the way. It's a way to change it up so I don't get too bored. Because as much as I love my stories, sticking with the same story over and over again can be a little, tedious. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, yada yada yada. Make sure to share and tell your friends as well, okay? Bye guys, I love you. Bye!